Hello and welcome to the inaugural Leaders Lounge. My name is Claire Brock and I will be your host for this afternoon. We will be talking to 5 exemplary leaders about everything they know, what has inspired them. They will be sharing their insights and their wealth of experience from their respective fields. Now, this is an interactive discussion, as you know, and we want to hear your thoughts. So please submit your questions if you have them anywhere along the line of this discussion on the online Slido platform, and we will get to them at the end of the show. But I'd very like to welcome my panel here today, Stuart Lancaster, Fiona Coghlan and Paul McGinley. And we're going to go straight ahead and talk about leadership philosophy and what it means to our panelists here today. Stuart, I'd like to start with you. And when it comes to your own leadership journey, what has shaped you along the way? How did you come to where you are today?
It's a long story. I think probably the start point would be, for me, and I guess for a lot of leaders out there, is your upbringing. I think your upbringing and the environment which you were brought up in as a child, where you went to school, your parents' influence, that certainly have shaped me massively. So I was brought up on a dairy farm in the Lake District, which is just on the border between England and Scotland. And my dad took over the farm when he was 16, and I watched him every day get up milking the cows, 6 o'clock in the morning, milk them in the afternoon. And his, I guess, relentless work ethic and love of being outdoors definitely had a bearing on my philosophy. So that idea that you have to work hard to succeed. I think I went away to school, so I went away to a small boarding school, and I think I learned when I went to school independence. It was 10 years old when I went away. It was probably a bit young, really, but I learned independence, but also I gravitated to leadership positions within the school. So when I was in the sixth form, the head teacher at the time, a guy who really, I guess when I look back now, shaped my leadership philosophy, basically empowered me to run elements of the school teams, the rugby teams, the cricket teams, part of doing things like speech day, speaking in public. That definitely had a big impact as well. And that then led to university and a teaching degree. So being taught how to teach and taught how to communicate, how to organize sessions, how to get the best out of people, how to motivate the demotivated, how to differentiate between different abilities within the same class, and doing that five times a day, different lessons, different challenges, 5 days a week for 40 weeks of the year was huge. That then led to an academy manager's job, where I was then, I guess I went from coaching or teaching into more a leadership and managerial role, where I was asked to build an academy, sort out infrastructure of the academy. I did that for 5 years. That then led to a head coaching job at 35 years old, which then led to a job with the RFU, again, a leadership, management and coaching role. And then, I guess with Martin Johnson finishing in 2011, I got the interim coaching job with England, did the England job, and obviously now here I am at Leinster. So lots of different paths along the way, but one of the key defining moments, I think, when I think back to it now, was I was put onto a level 5 leadership course when I was 32 years old, and it was held at Ashridge Business School, and that, for me, gave me a lot of the theory behind how to become a great leader. And once that door was opened, I really pushed through that door and really understood that leadership is a skill that can be learned. And I think that was probably the real defining moment.
Because that's the big question. Are leaders born or are they made? It seems to me that it came naturally to you, but it's a skill that you finally honed.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting if we did a poll online and asked that question. And I think I've asked the question in an audience in the past. And you probably got half the people saying, you know, it's born, it's a gift. You're born with you're good at communicating, good at relationships, and good at getting the best out of people. And there'd be another half the group would say, you know, yes, you can make great leaders. And I actually think it's both. I mean, there are people I know who've probably never studied leadership, but naturally you just warm to their personality. They're great at communicating. You willingly follow them because of who they are and how they make you feel. But the most important thing, I guess, for people listening online is that leadership is a skill that can be learned. I truly believe that. And everyone can learn to become a better leader. And that's the reassuring thing for us all out there, that you never stop learning. And yes, I gravitated to leadership positions, but I would say the reason I've ended up in the positions I've ended up in is because I studied leadership and wanted to become a better leader. And I really enjoy helping individuals get better and working in teams. And that's what I see as leadership being.
Fiona, you were thrust into leadership roles from a very young age. How has that style evolved over the years?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of similarities actually to Stuart, I suppose, from your childhood. Horse riding was actually one of my first sports, and you get a lot of responsibility at a very young age. Then going into team sports in school, I was captain of school team. And I certainly didn't have very finished leadership skills when I was in school, but they've certainly evolved through experiences, opportunities and relationships with people from, my club up to international, up to the Barbarians team. And I think a key comes down to relationships with them. And I never really had a philosophy about what type of leadership style I had. It was more, I always asked what's the best for the team and how can I get the best out of others on the team. And I think that was one thing. And then another thing was about standards, things that are non-negotiables like hard work, being on time, respect for yourself, respect for the people around you. And we had a saying in our squad, the winning qualities of the team will be defined by the standards that we set. Now, I don't think it needs to be put on a poster, but that's what we lived it. We lived it every day. And I think that was fundamental in our development as a squad and me as a leader.
How important do you think, Paul, is that leadership philosophy to have when you're going into a role managing others?
Oh, you've got to have a philosophy. You've got to have something that you believe in. And, coming from an individual sport like I did in golf and trying to lead and captain some very, very successful and very wealthy professional golfers, that's a difficult dynamic to go into, particularly when you don't get the players all in the same room until the actual Monday of the tournament. So you have to do a lot of managing away in the 2 years beforehand, and you do it on an individual basis. And that was kind of one of the keys that I did because of the dynamics that were involved, that unlike Stuart and Fiona, who might have been working with a team week after week in terms of training sessions. In a golfing sphere, that's not the case. You inherit everybody on the Monday of the tournament. So a lot of that management and the planning was done away from the tournament venue. A lot of the communication was done away from it. So when you do get to the venue, you hit the ground running and you're focusing on performance more than anything else from there.
And golf is unique because it is an individual sport, but you're going to have to switch it up a gear when it comes to managing a team and managing those individuals. It can be quite tricky. Yeah,
very tricky. It's a very difficult dynamic, because they are trained from a very young age to have that mental mindset. A lot of it is about selfishness. It's about being self-centered. It's not caring about anybody else. And then, everything that's the antithesis of what a team player is. And then you have to bring them into that environment and get them into a place where they're going to be comfortable, and creating a platform for them and an environment for them where they can still go out and play to the same level they do as individuals. And that's what makes it so complex. And the culture is really important. Communication is absolutely massively important. And I think the big key, the really big key, because it is unique circumstances in golf, were to keep them in that individual mindset. You don't want them too much of a player. A team player rather. You need to make sure that it's still about them, because they don't really think for anybody else. They generally think for themselves, and you've got to almost make them feel selfish about their own input into the team.
Often when it comes to sport, we think of everything being on the pitch, but Fiona, you believe it's those off the pitch moments that you can really garner support and build a team as a leader.
Yeah, it's go back to relationships and getting to know people and what makes people tick, not about what they can bring on the pitch, but why they're there and what's motivating them behind them. Like, I always think sitting down and having a cup of tea with someone and getting to know their background, their family, why they're there is way more beneficial than what they bring on the pitch. That'll come, and their skills and natural talents will come through. But if you're there and you get to know the person and what's behind them, I think it's way more valuable, and you'll get more out of them in the end, and they'll develop more as a person in that sense.
Stuart, I think people will be very interested to know that if you think that a leadership is something that can be learned, do you ever get to the point where you've mastered it?
No. I would say never, really. We had a game last night, and I'm reflecting back on how I prepared the team, what I said at half-time, how can I review the game properly tomorrow, who do I need to connect with. Fiona's point there about connection. That is ultimately the art of leadership, about how you connect with people. And I remember I was taught or told that connection is like an invisible cord between two people, and the great leaders have this capacity to develop these cords between all the people that they work with in their organisation, and the thicker the cord, the stronger the relationship. And what we need to do as leaders is to be able to communicate and connect with everyone. So we've got this team that played last night. We've got a group of players who are playing for Ireland. We've got a group of young players who are coming through. We've got management team and everyone else. And all I'm thinking in my mind, how can I connect with these individuals to get the best out of them? And it's a never-ending journey, really, because every day is a different day. Every situation's different. And in a team sport like rugby, particularly in a club environment where you've got 30-odd games a year, tomorrow we've got the review. How do we review the game? How do we reflect on the performance? How do we get better for next time? How do we move on to prepare for the next game? It's never a straight line upwards. That's one thing I've definitely learned. It's a rocky road sometimes, but if you get more decisions right than wrong, if you communicate well with people, if you build relationships, if you thicken that cord, then people will begin to follow you as the leader.
Paul, that challenge of getting individuals to work as a cohesive team that will yield results, it's a tricky one. It's one that you've had to embrace over the years.
Yeah, we had a massive big quote that I hung up in the team room as you enter the team environment for the week. The best teamwork comes from those people working as individuals towards one goal in unison. And that's really the mindset that I wanted. As much as team is important, and we're all very much team players here, the individual is really, really important. You've got to create a platform, an environment, and you've got to get into his or her mindset in order for them to perform.
How do you do that?
Excuse me, how do you do that? A lot of communication, back to Fiona's point there, absolutely critical. Communicate. And it's not just communicating to, in golfing terms, knowing the players as well as I do, and played with them. I understand their game. I understand what their physicality strengths are, what their weaknesses are. That's easy. Statistics, I've got data to back up everything that I know. The real key to unlocking them is individuals, and the real key to managing them is knowing them as individuals. I spent a lot of time doing that. On occasion I would fly internationally to meet somebody and have dinner with them or spend a couple of days with them, and getting to know them. Then also moving behind the scenes, getting to know their family, getting to know the management teams around them, the coaches around them, all of those things. What makes them tick? What is it that unlocks this player? What is his mindset? Where is he at in his life at the moment? What's going on outside of the golf course? All of those things are really key. It's not that you're always communicating that to them, but to be aware of all of that environment is really important. And it's something I spent a lot of time on, and it's an essential part of managing a group of players.
You found that as well, Fiona, empathy being a very important key in bringing the most out of your players and your team.
Yeah, I suppose I was always probably good at reading the room and reading the situation, but then actually displaying that empathy was probably something that I had to work on over the years, and I don't think I've fully got there yet, but it certainly was a concerted effort by me to get to know the players, just find out about them, put a hand on their shoulder if they needed something, needed help out. And I just think in the current situation that we're in, and staff starting new jobs and they're not in that environment where people get to know them, I think it's still possible, whether it's just a phone call or something. I still think people can do it, even though everything's online these days. I still think it's possible to go and find out people. And it's tough at the moment. It's tough starting a new job. You don't know what's going on in people's lives, what's going on in their house. But I think if you just take a minute out of your busy schedule as well to just find out how people are ticking on by in these tough times.
So you can use that, the idea, many people will be familiar with it now, where we're all working remotely and how you maintain those relationships and in fact build on them, especially with new members of a team. It's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, and even you're changing your skills of how you deliver online. Like I was teaching online, which I found incredibly tough to teach online, and you're changing your skills. So already you're under pressure as a leader to do your basic job that you're supposed to do, but then connecting with those people. But it might just take a split second, a message or a phone call, not in the team form that it might be, and I think you'll get value from that.
Have you found that's worked for you, Stuart, connecting with people one-on-one, but doing it specific to the personality you understand you're dealing with?
Yeah, I think two things. One, connecting in a remote world is a challenge, there's no doubt, and in the current climate that we're in. But I think we can still connect with emotion. We can still show people we care. We can still talk on a Zoom call and inspire people with a vision for the future. I still think we can do that. We used, I think, the lockdown period at Leinster, for example, I think we used that really effectively to do that. We stayed connected. It was little and often. We gave them projects, and it was that constant level of communication, but also there was one session I remember that we did where we talked about the future and what we were going to achieve together. And, as the leader, if you can inspire them with detail and describe it in colour and what it'll feel like in the change room, when we've achieved our goal and how it'll feel when we're back together again as a group, it's amazing how that can really help and lift the spirits. But that ability to connect, is critical. And one of the things I found challenging when I was coaching the national team with England was the sheer number of tasks I had to do as the leader. It took me away probably from the connection piece. And in hindsight, what I probably could have done or should have done was delegated some of the managerial tasks to a general manager or someone who could have supported me. I didn't have that person. That was the lesson learned, I guess. And then I can get away from the task-orientated part of the job and become the people person, if you like. And I actually met Eddie Jones after I left England, and he asked me, what would you do differently? I said, I probably would have picked a smaller group of players for the World Cup training squad, because I found myself so task-orientated that it stopped me from doing that. And it's a lesson I learned and I brought to Leinster, in that, I try not to stay behind my laptop analysing games all the time, looking at the data, writing down training sessions. Get down to the gym floor, connect with people, find out what's going on, find out how they are, how they feel the game went. And it pays back. It pays back because you've showed them that you care, and it comes back in return.
Paul, Stuart has pressed on a good point there about the idea of delegation. You did that very successfully with your vice-captains throughout the Ryder Cup.
Yeah, I'm smiling as Stuart is saying that. I was very fortunate in the Ryder Cup because I was a vice-captain twice on two occasions, in 2010 and 12 to Colin Montgomery and Jose Manuel. I was one of their four vice-captains, and I learned a lot from being a vice-captain in that environment. And one of the things that I learned was that the captain can't be everywhere, because the Ryder Cup is a very unique format in sport, because there's four different arenas going on at the same time. There's four matches on at the same time, all on different holes, and the captain has to kind of bob and weave between all four. And my experience was that the captains were finding this incredibly difficult. Also, my own experience as a player. When I played in Ryder Cups, I hated it when all of a sudden I'm focused on the match and all of a sudden this blue card would arrive and the captain would be there and he'd be judging you for a hole or two and then he'd go off again. So when I evolved into being a captaincy, I took those experiences and realised I don't want to be that guy. I'm going to be slightly different here. So what I did was I had 5 vice captains, 12 players on the team, and of the 8 that were playing the first session, I'd have one vice captain following each game, and then the 4 who were not playing, I'd have a 5th vice captain watching there. And a little secret was I watched most of it on TV. I then reverted, once they went off the first tee, I went back to our team room and I've been able to watch most of it on TV then and have an overview, and then constantly communicating through the radio telephone as to each of the vice captains getting feedback.
For you, it gave you that headspace that you needed to look at the bigger picture. That
helicopter view is absolutely important, crucial. For me, it was because I didn't see my role, unlike certainly you, Stuart, in terms of rugby, and I'm sure you as well, Fiona. in the field of play, you're influencing play with decisions that you're telling the players to do. You're making a call, you're changing a strategy, you might be making a substitution. That's not the case in the Ryder Cup. My view was, once the players go off that first tee, I stand back. I don't get involved. It's not my job to go up and tell Rory McIlroy, by the way, Rory, be careful of the wind here. The guy in front missed it left, and this is a club more than you think. No. These are the best players in the world. They got a caddy on their shoulder, and I needed to empower that relationship. So my job was to stand back. I'd already rolled that dice and that team for that day, and my job was to critique that and get ready for the session in the afternoon.
Do you think, Fiona, it can be difficult for a leader to do that?
Yeah, it's definitely. You're so invested in it that you want to be so part of it. To take that step back and take that whole helicopter approach, it's very difficult. I'd imagine it's even tougher as a coach to actually want players to implement it. And I suppose that was my kind of role as captain, was that like middle management. I was trying to impart the coach's view on the game, and sometimes you just want to make that difference, but you have to empower the players and you have to ensure that everyone on the pitch takes ownership of their job in order to get a successful outcome.
Okay, well, that was a great start to the show. We'll be staying with Stuart, Fiona and Paul as we look at the relentless pursuit of leadership excellence next. Welcome back. Stuart, I want to start with you on this one. The relentless pursuit of leadership excellence, it seems never-ending and constant. But are there essential traits that are shared by all great leaders through the ages, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think there are. I mean, I think there are loads, actually. But I guess I've narrowed it down to 4, I think, that are really critical in great leaders. And they're inspired, for me. I read a book, The Leadership Challenge, and it came a lot from reading that book, really. And they talk about great leaders being honest, inspiring, forward-thinking and planning, and having technical excellence. So if you go through each 4, so I think your passport as a leader is ultimately your integrity and your honesty. People will follow you not because they're paid to or because you're their boss, because it's how you make them feel, and your integrity and the way you carry yourself and the honesty with which you hold yourself to account and others to account, I think is really, really important. People just want the truth. So I think that's number 1. I think in terms of inspiration, I think you don't have to be an amazing orator all the time, but I think you have to have moments of inspiration that people can see that you've got a vision for the future as the leader. We're talking about someone who's at the top of an organization or working towards the top of an organization, leading people. They want to see where you're going. And there was a great analogy someone said to me not too long ago. Said, when you're driving a car, if you're constantly looking in the rearview mirror, you're going to crash because you're always looking at the past. And if you're driving in fog and you can't see where you're going to crash as well because you've got no clear vision. So your job as the leader is to paint the picture of the future, so people will have a direction that they can follow. So, and to do that, you need to do that in an inspiring way, and you need to give yourself a bit of time and a bit of space to think about not what you're going to say to the people who you're working for, but how you're going to say it, and how you're going to bring it to life, the journey that we're going on this team. So I think that's really important. With that forward thinking and planning, same thing really. People want to know where we are now, where we're going to be in 6 weeks' time, in 6 months' time, in a year's time. I'm constantly saying to the lads at Leinster, listen, our goal is to win the Pro 14, to win Europe, but we want to do this consistently. Why can't we do this for the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? And we can do that because we underpin it with strong identity, good culture, good behaviours, values-based organisation, etc., etc., etc. And then the final thing is you need technical excellence to have credibility as a leader. So whilst I would understand leadership generally, I'm not sure I'd be an effective leader in a law firm or in a construction company because I wouldn't have the technical knowledge. But so I would spend a lot of my time thinking about how can I be a better coach? How can I understand the game better? How can I be creating a team that's more adaptive How can we stay one step ahead as an attacking team, as a defensive team? How can I be better at imparting my knowledge and my thoughts and my philosophy on the group? So technical excellence is a key part to being a great leader. So I think it's not just one of those four, it's all those four. And you've got to get, if you're giving yourself a mark out of 10, you've got to give yourself as high a 10 as possible. And if you're not getting to 10, which none of us would, I don't think, let's strive to be better in each area.
And that goes back to your point about always learning and never quite mastering the art of leadership. But part of that job is empowering others and making others leaders as well. You've had to do that with players over the years, with staff, with a team, in order to build a team.
Yeah, I think, I guess, if I go back to the story about me going on that leadership course when I was, 32 at Ashridge Business School, what I'm trying to do is to pass on what I learned at 32 to Gary Ringrose, James Ryan, the young leaders at Leinster when they're 22. If I can do that and do that successfully, then we're going to grow leadership within Leinster, which means that as some senior players come to the end of their careers, we've got this constant evolution of leadership within the group where, as Fiona says, they can grow at the ownership of the team and really begin to drive the standards of behaviours themselves. So as one generation of players finishes, you've got another generation coming through. And we don't wait for it to happen through experience or wait for it to happen by accident. We proactively develop leadership and, things like self-awareness. So one of the key fundamentals I'll be saying to players is understand yourself first. To be a good leader, you've got to understand yourself. Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Are you detail-orientated? Are you more...
How do you find that out?
Well, there's lots of different ways. One, you can reflect on yourself, think about your own behaviours and your own attitudes and how you deal with different situations. You can gather feedback. I've used various 360-degree tools to give me feedback as the type of leader I am. The psychometric profiles that I've used in the past, we used one at Leinster called Insights, which gives you different colours. So you'd have blue would be detail-orientated, green would be team player, yellow would be sort of extrovert and energy giver, and red would be directive. And you're a mixture of all these four colours. And the beauty of that for me was it gave me, again, a bit more insight. So I'd be slightly more introverted than extroverted.
Which may surprise people.
Yeah, but so it means that I can take myself to that yellow place, or that sunshine yellow they call it, and present in front of team meetings and everything else. But equally, I'm quite happy in my own company, and I know if I've used a lot of emotional energy leading over a difficult period of time, I need to recharge my leadership battery, let's call it. And the more I can know myself, the more I can understand how to be the best leader I can be.
Yeah, you've used similar testing in your squad, haven't you? And tested yourself in a similar way, Fiona.
Yeah, I suppose similar to Stuart, I would have been quite self-aware and known what type of personality it was, and we did the Insights personality, and when it came back I was red, yellow, predominantly. Like, you do have a mixture of everything, so that's fiery red and sunshine yellow. But the biggest impact that personality testing had on me was how I influence and impact other people with my decisions, or how I talk to them. And although I'll still, in the heat of the moment, revert back to my fiery red, and that might negatively impact someone, then the reflective piece is that it's really important after the match or after the situation that I can go back to them and have a conversation with them about it and how it affected them, that we can just move on with it and learn for the future as well. And I don't think you necessarily have to do personality profiling per se, but you have to be aware about it, and you have to have conversations with people in order to get through that point, if it is a blocking or a sticking point for that person.
Are people comfortable with those conversations? Tapping in a bit deeper?
I do think sports people are better because they're in that environment where it's honest, they want to improve so much, and it's just that form that they have. But in general, I think people sometimes want to leave their faults behind them, and they're not, I suppose, that growth mindset that people talk about, that they're not prepared to put themselves forward and grow, and work has to be done around it, and they need support people and people that they trust in order to help them on that journey.
What do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm certainly subsequent Ryder Cup captain since I was captain, have used profiling to great effect, and I'm certainly not going to talk against it. I felt it was quite intrusive, a little bit your question there, Claire, and I felt I didn't want to go over that hurdle and ask the guys to, for me to cite.
What colours are you?
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't do that. I relied on the old-fashioned way. One of the things I did was I got all the press conferences that they were doing, unbeknown to them. I made sure through our media officer that I was getting, and I was doing my amateur psychology reading through them as golfers, where they were at, what they were talking about in terms of their golf. Were they up about their golf? Were they down? Where was the mindset? What were they talking about? How they were performing in tournaments? I was using my own experience of being a golfer to read where they were and kind of make my own profile. I was also relying on the man in the pub, if you want to call it that, just that kind of, how you doing, how's it going? And, like the Americans call it the water cooler chat. And I was using it, in that regard, it'd just be running into them and profiling. And then I would always put notes. I had my phone with me and I'd have a note on each player. And every time I had a conversation with them, I would write down what he said and where they were at, or little things that I had. So before I met them the next time, I would reread my previous notes and was able to follow on in that conversation. So I had a continuity. When you're dealing with so many people, it's easy to get distracted. And what did I say to you the last time? And what did I say to you? And then you get distracted and you make mistakes. So I did it the old-fashioned way, but I think things have moved on, certainly since I've been captain. I'd be very much in favour of the profiling.
I think there's still huge value in the old-fashioned way. Every year we always did team building. So one year we went to the army, and you see people under stress and how they react under stressful situations. But before the last World Cup, Goose, our coach, said, what would you like to do for team building? And I said, just go to the bar and have a chat. Like, literally just go and see where people are, where they are at that time. And it was hugely valuable. And it wasn't about the drinking or anything like that. We were training the next day. It was literally just time together and sitting down and having that chat about how people are, how they're getting on, how they're finding camp. And I think that's hugely valuable as well.
Gathering information, and that's where the value of the families and their teams around them, and you can get information from them as well too. So you're building a whole profile yourself. I mean, I'm sure it's moved up a lot in the modern world, Stuart. You're probably in the cutting edge now of it with Leinster.
How important is that?
Well, I just think, like I say, what we're trying to do is ultimately to get the players to own the team, and we want the youngest players to develop their leadership, their knowledge. And like I said, the priority for me was to get them to understand, A, leadership is a skill that can be learned, B, understand yourself, C, understand how to get the best out of other people, D, understand how to build good relationships. So the players would get tired of me saying, don't come to a meeting without a point of view, because as a leader, you need to have a point of view, and you've got to be able to articulate your point of view in front of the group, and you have to have the confidence to do that. And generally, when I came to Leinster, what I found was they were pretty quiet in meetings. I would ask for a point of view or what's your opinion, and I wouldn't get much of a response.
No hands up?
Not really, no, not at all. And I'm saying to the likes of Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose and James Ryan or whoever, boys, we need to hear your voice here. But in order to have your voice, you have to have a point of view. The senior players, like when I first arrived, like Sean O'Brien would be very vocal in team meetings, Johnny Wood, Rob Carney, Jamie Heasley, because these guys were more older, more experienced. They had clearly a lot of knowledge, and they had a point of view that they wanted to articulate, and they were confident doing that. The challenge in an organisation is, how do we get the younger people in the organisation to do that? And I think the more we can explain to them that we can develop you as a leader, and we invest time in them, and we make them feel valued and part of the organisation. People often ask me, why would Leinster be successful? And this goes back to, I've coached in England, been around all the 12 Premiership clubs, I've worked in the academy system, I've seen the clubs that have been successful. The reason Leinster is successful is because the younger players and the senior players are all linked together. We're all part of the same team. And I think one of the worries about the current climate is young people in the organisation might fall through the cracks because you're not having that conversation with them, the water cooler conversation, because they're not in the office, you've got the remote learning and everything else. So I think we really need to be mindful of how we get the best out of the young people in the organisation and keep developing them as leaders, because ultimately they're going to be the future of whatever organisation you're working in.
Stuart, let's talk about the challenging times, because that information that you're gaining about everyone, that sense of leadership that you're instilling in everybody, that really comes to the fore when the chips are down.
It comes at a price, leadership. There's a price to pay, and not everyone wants to go there, and which is understandable. You know, some people might just want to be a good number two, or a good manager, or a good coach, or a good teacher. Some people maybe don't want to gravitate to be a deputy head teacher, or a head teacher, or the CEO, or whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all. But for me personally, I always wanted the challenge of trying to help people get better and build great teams. And I think in order to really influence that, you need to be towards the top of the organisation, and you need to put yourself in a leadership position. But it's a rocky road, you know, and show me a leader who's not gone through failure. You know, everyone I know, certainly in the coaching world, has had great success, who are right at the top of the game, but they've also had failure as well. They've also lost games, they've lost tournaments, they've lost jobs. And, you know, I found in my own particular situation, it had been a rocky road. And, you know, with England, I think we'd won maybe 70% of the games whilst I was in charge. I think it was 16 out of 26 Nations games, which is a great record with a young team. But when we needed to win in the World Cup in 2015, we didn't. You know, we lost a game we should have won, and the fallout for me was huge. You know, personally, professionally, credibility for my family, and it really made me question, why did I put myself in that position in the first place? Now, I don't regret doing what I did, and I look at the team now and the evolution of that group to get to a World Cup final in 2019, and how there's lads who I was given their first cap to when they were 20 years old, who are now 28 years old and on 80 caps, and I see their growth, and it gives me a great amount of pleasure. But for me personally, it was painful.
In terms of inspiring you and getting you through tough times, to see end results and to see success, your family was at the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, I mean, well, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about resilience, you know, and how important resilience is, you know, and resilience as a leader, for a leader, it's actually a key characteristic, because not everything goes right all the time. You know, you've got to learn to bounce back. And for me personally, I obviously put a tremendous amount of pressure on not pressure, personal pressure on my kids and my wife and my mum and dad and everyone else, but I was very, very mindful when I left the job of the challenging times that it was for them as well, because they cared about me, they wanted to protect me, and they couldn't do that. And this is, you know, one thing I have learned is that you need to get the balance right. If you want to be a leader, you need to get the balance right with your personal health and well-being as a leader, your family, and also your work. And you know, the analogy is the 3 glass balls. You're juggling 3 glass balls. What happens if you drop one and it smashes? And you know, that glass ball might be your own health and well-being, because you've not given your time and the space away from leadership. The second might be, you know, your family. You know, you've not connected with your family like you should do. And the third is, you know, you work, you don't do your job properly. And
we can see you there with family in those images, and your parents, importantly. That was a poignant last image, wasn't it, Stuart?
Yeah. So, you know, after the World Cup finished, I remember I went back to the farm, and my mum and dad were clearly upset, because obviously I was getting hammered in the media. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, do I really want them in the mid-70s to be so unhappy? So I had this inner resolve, that resilience piece that you talk about was inside me anyway, you know, to get down from, you know, on the canvas, you know, you're getting counted out, and then you think, right, I'm going to need to stand up and fight here. So I reviewed what I could have done better. I went back coaching again. I travelled to the Southern Hemisphere. And fortunately, Leinster gave me the opportunity to get back and coach at a great European club. And those images where I could take my family to the Aviva, you know, in 2018, we'd won the double, They're the moments that have always inspired me, to make them happy, and to see the transformation from 2015 to 2018 in those images. They're the favourite photos, and the one of my mum and dad is probably the most poignant, really, because that was the last photo I had with my dad, because he passed away, suddenly had a cardiac arrest on the farm only a couple of months later. And I don't think ever I would have been, I won't say forgive myself, but I was so delighted he was there for that moment. And it's been tough since, obviously, with Dad not being here. But I'm glad he was there, and I'm glad, I'm pleased that Leinster gave me the opportunity to get back going again. But that is part of leadership. Part of leadership is getting up when you're down and driving on, because it's a rocky road.
Just listening to Stuart there speak about family, it's poignant, and they're also a huge driver, aren't they? People's families that would be in a leadership capacity, and also as a player, to have your family there, that support base behind you every step of the way, is so important, isn't it, Fiona?
Yeah, it's a support network from when you're younger, and they literally are your driver. They're taxi driving you everywhere. They open up our house to people staying in our house through the bad days. They're there, and trust me, when I was playing, there was more bad days than good days. It culminated in success in 2013, 2014, and it was brilliant to have them there. And I retired then, and my mum was wondering why I was retiring. Would I not play on for another couple of years? But likewise, the team meant so much to me, and our support structures in the team, our management were unbelievable. They were so balanced in like, they knew each other's strengths, weaknesses. Goose, our coach, brought in people who he felt would add value to the management team, and senior players. We had a senior player group. So when it came to leadership, it wasn't just about me within the squad. On the pitch, there was senior players. There was Lynn Cantwell, Joy Neville, and it was really important to me that when we won the Grand Slam, that they were lifting the trophy with me, that they were front and foremost, because they'd slogged through years of really, really tough days. We bounced back, and I had friends who weren't involved in the sport, and they what kept pushing you, and I said, I knew there was potential in us to do something special, and I knew that we could develop and we could become, I didn't think we'd win a Grand Slam, but that every year there would be improvements. And the squad really drove me. Like, that's what got me out of bed at 5:30 in the morning. There's the picture of the girls at the front. What got me out of bed at 5:30 in the morning and go to work all day and go back out on the pitch was the squad, and what each and every one of those brought to it.
And as Stuart was talking about there, the losses that inspire you then to win and to do it in the end. It was a tough uphill struggle, wasn't it, for the ladies team?
Yeah, you learn from losses though. You sit back, you reflect what you need to improve on, what you need to get better in the future. And we got a good blend then in 2013, 2014, where we had very experienced players, but we also had that youth in the squad as well, and everyone had a sense of ownership of what they could bring to the squad, and ultimately that's what drove us to success in the 2 years.
We talk a lot about success, Paul, but really, as you were saying in golf, it's a lot about losing before you get the cup, you win the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had dinner when I was just turned professional. I was only a pro a couple of months, early 90s, and I was down in Spain in Jerez, and luckily I had dinner with Jack Nicklaus, the greatest player the game's ever seen, and won the most tournaments and the most championships and major champions. And as we were leaving the restaurant late that evening, it was just me, his son, his agent, and Nicholas, the four of us, and he said, Paul, I want to wish you good luck in your career, but remember, in my career I've spent 90% losing at this game and only 10% winning, and I'm the most successful player ever played the game. So that puts it in perspective. Like you take somebody like Djokovic, he spends 90% of his time winning games, so golf is that the word that Stuart used there, resilience, is a huge part of the makeup of any successful golfer, because you have to get back on the saddle again, you have to dust yourself off and get on again. And even when you're having a good week and have a bad finish the last 2 or 3 holes, from 68th hole to the 72nd hole, and all of a sudden all the good work is unraveled and you're back, you're picking yourself up again. And generally that's what you're doing as golfers. So golfers in general are resilient. It's part and parcel. The mental side of it is such a huge part, and that resilience is key.
When you lose focus, how do you get back on track? Do you have a fail-safe method that works every time?
Yeah, if I was doing it again, I would certainly approach my own career differently than than I might have done. At the time, it was hard work. It was just grit. And sometimes you've got to be a little bit cleverer than just pure grit. And it's about climbing the tree in the right way, going back to the fundamentals of who you are. What we know now about sports science, for example, often I tire myself out practicing too much. I wasn't in a place to put in a good day's session of practice. I'd be playing too many tournaments. Looking back on my career, too much of that was happening. That kind of data was not available, and it is nowadays. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot in the modern game, professional golfers, young guys coming out are hitting the ground running earlier and becoming more successful quicker, because they're not having to find their way through the maze of being a professional golfer. But the real key for me is the resilience. It's a huge part of anybody in terms of being successful in anything in life. Life is not a straight line. Success is not a straight line, no matter who you are. You might look at somebody like Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy and think, wow, their career has been like that. It hasn't. Everybody's got ups and downs. Okay, some people have more ups and downs than others. But a question I'd like to ask Stuart, because when I look at Stuart, I think of resilience more than anything. By the way, I've got a great name for your book, The Rocky Road to Dublin. I've got a great, with all this success you're having with Leinster, that's what the book should be called. But I'd love to know, if you can illuminate really the question that Claire asked earlier. It's so important, this resilience and exactly the things that you put in place, the very, very first things you put in place to go from where you were at the end of England to coming back into the fold again. And if you're looking back on it now, what were the key fundamentals that you did in that grey area before you came into Leinster again that were absolutely key and essential?
Yeah, and I think it was when the World Cup finished, I went straight back to the Lake District, to the farm, actually. So one of the key things was going back to my roots, I guess. I don't know why instinctively I went back there, but and my parents had parked a caravan in a tiny little campsite in Lawton in the Lake District. So I went and sat in this caravan and I reviewed and reflected everything that I'd done. I journaled and went back and thought,
So you had journaled while you were with England?
Yeah,
journaled every day?
But then I went back through that chronological order of events, selection of the squad, training sessions, camp to Denver, warm-up games. Did we have enough warm-up games? So it was a very honest and personal self-reflection from my own point of view. And I'm pretty self-aware, and I could almost intuitively recognize what bits were within my control. And, clearly as a coach, there's a lot of things that are not in your control in a sporting context, like the bounce of the ball, a referee's decision, how the game unfolds. And, the game was lost 28-25 on one moment at the end, but there were lots of little moments in the game. And you play the game over and over again, we'd probably win it 8 or 9 times out of 10, but we lost. And, I had to pay the price, I guess. And so I needed to hold myself accountable, first of all, before the internal review took place. And obviously I left the RFU not long afterwards. So in the immediate aftermath of leaving the RFU, the phone goes quiet. All the people who used to text you then stopped texting you. And that was tough. It was tough, And I think one thing about resilience is to understand that it's not a bad thing to go and share your challenges or the struggles that you're having with other people, particularly outside of the organisation. That's why I think mentors are very good for leaders. Now, there was someone who reached out to me, a lady called Elizabeth, who'd been involved with my leadership evolution with it when I was coaching England. And she said, "Do you fancy a coffee?" And I drove down and actually met her. And it was a brilliant 2 hours for me. It was very cathartic to be able to offload to her and talk things through with her. And she could get me back on track mentally. And that was around Christmas time. Then I went to the Southern Hemisphere. And I actually went with the mindset of learning from other teams, but sharing what I'd learned. And there was something I found cathartic about sharing what I'd learned to other teams that helped me get over the challenge of losing my job in such a public way. So that definitely helped. There was a bit of Cumbrian grit and determination that I wasn't going to let people decide from the outside whether I was good or not at my job.
Yeah.
I was going to make sure, and the old Bill Walsh story in his book about you're a fighter, you've been knocked down, they're counting you out 6, 7, 8. You've got to stand up and fight, and there was definitely that inside me as well. Getting back on the horse, coaching again helped. I applied for a couple of jobs, and then fortunately Leo rang, and here I am, the rocky road to Dublin.
It's interesting what you're saying there about analysing where it went wrong or looking back on your diary and how you mapped out your own path during your career with England. Is that something that you encourage the players to do, or do you say, OK, you lost, let's move on now?
No, we always review. we always review defeat or victory.
There is a process of reviewing, but is there a point that?
Oh no, 100%.
Arguably,
you put it to bed. We have a sumo call. Shut up, move on. It's a book, isn't it? But we use it quite effectively. Now, fortunately at Leinster, we win more than we lose. So, but we've had some painful defeats, losing against Saracens in the European Cup final. And we lost against Saracens, and then the following week we had Munster in the Pro 14 semi-final. So they're waiting to come to the RDS to play against us. And the easy thing to do would have been to go, right, we've lost, we've got a game coming around the corner, let's just park that defeat and let's move on to Munster because we know it's a big game, etc., etc. But that's not what we did. What we did was, I met the senior leadership group, I met individuals, we reviewed what happened, why it happened. We had a good, honest discussion within the four walls of our team room. But because Leinster has a good level of identity, ownership, trust, all the things that you need in good teams to have those conversations, those honest conversations, and we were able to have them and then get to a point maybe by lunchtime on the Monday and go, right, are we all agreed on the lessons we've learned and we can do better next time? Yes, right, sumo. Let's move on. We've got Munster. And the boys almost need that physical call from me or Leo, whoever gives it, and go, right, we're moving on. So you're not dragging around the defeat forever. I could forever be looking in the rearview mirror, driving my car and looking and thinking about what if. But what sort of leader would that make me for Leinster?
Okay. Fiona,
just on your senior leadership group that you have, are they picked on position? Are they picked on skills? Or is it duration in the game? Or is it a mix of everything depending on where you feel?
Yeah, it's a mix of everything. I think the senior leadership group, there's lots of different ways I've seen them selected. Yeah. I think we've got a really good mix of senior players and young emerging leaders, which I think is the way it should be in any organisation. Initially when I first came, I guess the coaches would decide, but the players have now made the decision based on the values of the team. So we have 3 values that represent the team, and these then represent the behaviours that underpin the values, and the players who represent the values in the most effective way as leaders get voted in by the playing group, and they then represent the playing group, and they're that interface between, as you were, captain, between the coaches and the team. And I see us as one team anyway. I don't see us as like a silo-based leadership model where you've got the coaching team here, senior leadership group here, playing group here. It is one team. And I think there's a great phrase I've heard called the silent dance in teams. And the silent dance is where you've got different groups who start to create little cliques on their own and have little corridor conversations over here. And it happens in all teams. But if you've got a strong culture, identity, purpose, values, behaviours, it cuts across the silent dance, and everyone does what's right for the betterment of our team or our organisation. And the great teams and the great leaders out there, they navigate away from the silent dance, and they create teams that have strong levels of identity, strong levels of purpose, a clear vision about where they're going, strong leadership, etc.
Briefly, Fiona, you must have known all about that with that big success against New Zealand.
Yeah, I think back to it, we had a really good squad, those young players coming in and feeling that they were part of the squad and they had ownership and they had that voice that you spoke about earlier, and that it was extra eyes. So you have obviously management coming up with a game plan, but those players are really important with coming up with a game plan and what they see as well. There's more eyes on the game, and obviously it culminated in success for us. But even if I hadn't seen that success, I think that journey of development of the squad and the place where Irish women's rugby sits now was hugely beneficial to me as an individual, but also the squad and the game as well.
Okay, well, we have been running a poll throughout this discussion about Stuart's question, or my question to Stuart, about whether leaders are born or made. Let's see if people agree with you. I think we can see the results up on the screen there now.
79% it was just up, 79%.
Made.
Made.
79% say leaders are made.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of self-made leaders out there. That's good,
Good.
yeah.
That's very good. Yeah, because it shows that we can all become better leaders.
Yeah, and it's a strong message that you want to impart, that
Definitely.
there's potential in everyone. That brings a natural close to our second discussion here today, and some very interesting points raised. We'll be back shortly to discuss the evolution of a winning template with Jim Gavin. I'd like to welcome Lisa and Jim along to our panel today as we talk about the evolution of a winning template. You're both very welcome along, and Paul, thanks for sticking with us. Paul, I'll start with you, and how would you describe a winning template?
How would I describe it? I mean, you've heard of the term thinking outside the box. And in today's world of marginal gains and trying to get a gain on your competitors, people try to think outside the box. A winning template for me is thinking inside the box. What has worked in the past? What lessons have we learned from the past, and that we can bring forward? For me, you know, there's some great successes in the world have come from winning template, enhanced over time and evolved over time, not revolutionized, evolved. I mean, one of them here, it was showing the images on the screen here. On the left-hand side there is a picture of obviously a Liverpool fan. But we all know how famous the boot room is in Liverpool. It's a style, it's a culture, it's a way of playing the game. It's communicating and connecting with the local people in Liverpool. And the managers that were represented in that scarf have all adhered to evolved that winning template. The other one was the Mini that we saw there in it, the Mini car. You know, it's the Mini car in essence is an evolution of what came out in the 1960s. So it doesn't mean about ripping it up and starting again. And you know, my role as a Ryder Cup captain, I was coming in on the back of success, and a lot of leaders out there will be coming into positions in successful companies. And there's a lot of pressure when you have to carry on that success. And that's where a winning template comes in, and evolving identifying first of all what it was that was the real keys to success, putting your own identity on it, but inherently sticking to the principles of what was successful in the first place.
Some things may seem obvious in driving success, but there are key experiences that you brought into play that you found made all the difference when you were managing teams, Paul.
Yeah, for me, a lot of it, we spoke earlier with Fiona and Stuart, is communication. Communication for me is really, really key. And it just doesn't mean we're communicating here by words and a little bit by visual. I'm a very visual person. And in our team room in Gleneagles, even when I played, we always had visuals up in the team room, and I loved going in and getting that feel of previous players before me representing Europe, and now I'm doing it, and that was great. And I took that principle, again, you talk about evolving a winning template. That principle was there, but before it was just nice photographs. And I took those and put them in really enhanced positions and enhanced those images and put messages and key messages on them. I mean, this is a picture here of the interior in the team room. You know, I wanted this to be our manor. I wanted this to be somewhere to retire to in the evening that was really intimate and really, you know, you got Ryder Cup emblem on the floor.
You put your hand into interiors to get that
I did. I blew
right atmosphere.
I blew a lot of budget on that, to be honest, but I think it's really important that the players would come back and the caddies, that we come back after a hard day on the golf course and we walk in and what they call in England our manor. We were defending our manor here, and a really nice, cozy environment, and also an inspiring environment. That there'll be images on the wall, and maybe I might say something as a captain earlier in the week, and then the players will be walking to their bedroom in the evening time, and there'll be a huge big image and the same principle will be represented in a very evocative image. And it's a way of layering on the communication. And it wasn't a question of giving him loads and loads of information. That wasn't the idea. But the idea was to have 4 or 5 different principles and then replicate them over and over through different means. Sometimes it was words of the captain, sometimes it was words of the vice captain, sometimes it was in video messaging, and sometimes it was imagery around the team room. And so that layer of communication was absolutely vital, and I think it is. It's not about having a lot of complexity, it's about having 3 or 4 really core principles based around the challenges that you face as a company or as a team, and then layering it on with constant communication of how we're going to overcome those.
Lisa, we talk about the evolution of a winning template, evolving what's there, but if something is a success, why would you change it?
Because you don't want to plateau, because what success looked like last year won't be what success will look like next year or next week or next month, because invariably, as humans, our capacity to evolve and outperform ourselves and continue, you know, we always see world records, new Olympic records, new times. And that is the beauty of our capacity, is that it is infinite to continue to develop. So Paul's right, what you have to do is you don't make changes for change's sake, but you look at what's good. And particularly in team sports as well, like personnel change. Personnel in staff change, personnel in the team change. So you're constantly evolving. So what worked last year may not work again this year, and you constantly have to look. But the thing about change is it can be difficult for people, particularly if you feel you've got a winning formula. Why would you change it? Because that can make people feel uncomfortable. And one of the things I always like to do is just clasping your hands. So even for people at home, if you can clasp your hands, and lads, you can do it as well.
Here we go.
So you clasp your hands. So naturally, everybody will be right over left thumb or left over right. So it depends. Which are you, Jim?
I'm left over right.
You're left over, Paul?
Left over right.
Left over right.
Okay, so, but it's unusual that we're all the same. But what happens is, if we unlace our hands and relace them the opposite way, how does it feel?
Yeah, a little bit awkward, yeah.
Different.
Like I'm trying to learn golf.
But what it does is it feels uncomfortable.
It does.
And that's a really small change, but it can feel quite wrong, it can feel different, it can make people feel uncomfortable. But the thing about evolving is that you have to take people out of their comfort zones and change them. So if you relace your hands, and just while we're chatting now, that you continuously just interlace them, relace them, interlace them, relace them. And the thing about change is, if you can give it a consistent commitment to stick to the process and stay with it, if you take your hands away and put them back together, and then relace them, and all of a sudden, it doesn't feel as different. So the key point is that by evolving things and changing things, you can take people out of their comfort zones, but by stretching them to go to a new level of performance, you then set a new bar of what they're comfortable with. And that becomes your new platform and your new baseline upon which you look to evolve the next time.
Can you relate to that, Jim? The idea of not feeling that you need to change things up, but at the same time accepting that the natural evolution is a good thing, and how to set the base there for that success when you do decide to change things.
Yeah, Claire, in terms of a winning template, you've got, as a leader, you have got to embrace feeling comfortable about being uncomfortable. And the uncomfortable spaces is realizing that you have to embrace chaos, change, get into that growth mindset to push the team on to a new level. As Paul says, you need to keep reinforcing your key principles. You create that environment that ultimately dictates the behavior of your team or in a business environment. But as a leader, you do need to step into that space to understand, like, what worked for me last season, what worked for me for last year's game plan, that needs to evolve. Yes, we keep the good bits of it, but we need to keep moving on because we're on a railroad track. But there's other teams behind us, and if we don't keep moving forward, they're going to hit us.
But I think the lens that you look through things has to be different as well, and you have to challenge yourself as a leader. That if you look at something and you see it a certain way, you have to challenge yourself to see, can you see it in another way? And how can you see it another way? So we've got an image here that it's something I often use with teams, and as you can see, it's a dress. So I think we're going to run a poll on this. So it's what colour is...
It's quite a famous dress.
It is a famous dress. So if people are able to interact with it, that they...
Absolutely. We're going to run an online poll on this, and the question Lisa will be asking is the big question of the day. What colour is that dress?
Yeah, so, I mean, Jim...
That is definitely a gold and white dress.
Okay. Paul?
I'm going blue and black.
Claire?
I just can't see beyond blue and black.
And I can't see beyond white and gold. So the interesting piece is generally when I do this with a team is that it splits the room often fairly close to 50-50. So as a leader, what that teaches me is that everybody in the room can be looking at the same thing but can see it quite differently based on their experiences, based on their values, based on their formations as a player, as a coach, as a leader. And I think it's really important to be able to understand that people can look at something and see it quite differently. So in order to get that alignment, that you have to be able to see it yourself as through a different lens, but also understand that the way we look at it this year might be white and gold.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point Lisa's making. I know there's a lot of sports people looking in, sports coaches, but also business leaders. And Paul said he's a visual man. He likes to see visuals, and in Glen Eagles that you could see the powerful images for the Ryder Cup. But even from a sports coaching perspective, there's a concept called the VARK model, V-A-R-K. Worth looking up and learning about this. So if I'm trying to, for example, introduce a new tactical dimension to the football team, we'll use the tactics boards, the whiteboard, the chalkboard. Some players will get it straight away, that perception, they have it. Now some players then, I need to do the whiteboard, need to talk through it. Some players will get it, but Paul mightn't have got it yet. Now we need to talk about it, do it on the whiteboard, bring it onto the training field to walk through that particular tactic. Some players get it, some players still haven't got it. Until you do the talking, the whiteboard, the walkthrough, play the game, and then as Stu says, you reflect upon it, and then the penny will drop for some players. So that's a really key point from a leadership perspective as well, in terms of telling your strategy to your team. Some people mightn't just get it when you say it to them. There might be different methods that you have to use because people do have different perceptions.
But there's also the point on that is about the alignment. So, I mean, we see it quite differently, blue and black and white and gold. But in order to go after a common goal, in order to go after a common goal, you have to have alignment. So even though, like if we were a jury, could we convince you that that dress is white and gold?
No.
Yes.
I'm not seeing any white in that at all.
Either am I. Now, I mean, maybe you could start focusing on the background and then saying, well, if you see the background as being this colour, maybe it does look more white and gold now, does it? But are you saying, Lisa, that you need to win people over? You need to convince myself and Paul that it is, in fact, white and gold?
100%. I did this with my team in London, where I left them in a room and I said, I'll be back in 5 minutes. You have to tell me what colour the dress is.
They were easily swayed.
And but what happened was everybody had that opportunity to give their voice and to have their opinion and to feel it was shared within the room. But then comes a point of, okay, but we're going after this, and our objective here, our goal, is to reach alignment and to reach common ground and to be collaborative and to come together despite our differences and despite our way of seeing it differently. But we're going to say, right, for the purpose of this particular goal, I'm going to look at it differently and I'm going to say, that's what it is, I'm buying into it because that's what we need to do. And all together, people align and come back in. And when I came back in, the dress was blue and black.
There you go.
And there it was blue and black for that year.
You're
Paula,
very persuasive. Well done.
I'm interested, and it's probably the powers of persuasion play into this a bit, but in order to have success, and we're talking about the experiences that are important keys to that winning template, having fun, maybe not taking yourself so seriously all the time, there being an outlet outside of the main work practice is very important. You found that was a good driver in achieving success.
I did. I mean, when I became captain, and one of the things, and even before I became captain, when I was captain of this, what was called a Sevi Trophy, which is a smaller version of the Ryder Cup, Europe against continental Europe. And that was in 2011, I think it was the first time I was captain in that. And I sat down and and reviewed all the teams. Luckily, I'd been involved, I think, 10, 12 teams at that stage, and we'd won 11 out of the 12. And I sat down and I thought, what are the keys here? Why are we so successful in Ryder Cups? Why are we the underdogs, and yet we go in and we win all the time? Even though, as Lisa quite rightly said, the personnel often change, but what are the fundamentals that I can drag out and put forward again? And when I did it, it was the crack. It was the fun. Now, and I don't mean fun as in everybody, jolly, and there's no tension in there. Of course there's tension in there. You're playing, you're competing at the very top level in professional sport. This image here, I absolutely love. One of my favorite people, Eamon as well. And coming around the last stretch in the World Championship here, and he's still got another 50 meters to go, maybe more. And just a sense of enjoyment. This is a huge,
sheer delight in space.
Sheer delight. I believe it was in New York. Sheer delight that in the throes of competing, he still had something in him this was fun. And that's what I wanted to really get across to the players. As much as this is a really, really intense atmosphere, and we're going to have, over 1 billion people watching on TV, one of the biggest sporting events watched on globally anywhere, and we're going to have 60,000 people every day screaming for us to win, and it's going to be very intense. Remember the element of fun. And I brought it back, and where I got this from was one of the Ryder Cups, my first ever Ryder Cup I played in the Belfry in 2002. And on the second last day, on the Saturday evening, I was playing with Darren Clark as my partner, and we're playing obviously against two Americans. And we were the last game on the golf course, and we needed to get a half match in order for Europe to be level going into the singles, which is strategically, it was really important that we weren't behind going in. So it was huge pressure on this. And it was 4 balls, so we both played our own ball. Anyway, long story short, I ended up having a 6-footer to win the hole for a birdie. And as I was lining up the putt, and remember there's 25,000 people around the green, it's 10, 15 deep, and all the people on TV, and obviously I'm very nervous. And something came into my head, where it came from above, I don't know where it came from, but this thought came into my head that if I hold this putt, this crowd are gonna go crazy. And rather than feeling, oh my God, don't miss it, don't let them down, I felt the other way. I've got the control of 25,000 people in my hand here. I can't wait to hit this
showman came out.
Yeah, the showman came out. And I couldn't wait to hit the putt. And as I stood over, I was almost smiling, a bit like Eamon in that image there. I was almost smiling to myself. And of course, now I'm unrestricted, I'm freed up, and I hit a brilliant putt ball in the middle. And as I walked off, I really enjoyed the moment with the crowd. Now this is a bit unlike you, Jim, when you were manager of Dublin. I mean, there's no one way of doing it, but this was what was really inspiring for me. And I try to bring that forward, and that element of you guys are showmen. Go out and perform and enjoy performing. And when they're in that mindset, one of the things that I hated in, whether this came through or whether this was true or not, was the Bill Shankly statement that, football is not a matter of life or death. It's far more important than that. And whether it was said in jest or whatever, I think that's the furthest place you can be as a performer away from really competing, because I felt, my experience is, the best performances came when you were unrestricted and you had flow, and yes, there was pressure there, but you were uninhibited and you were a showman, you were performing. Now, I know Jim's got a slightly different take on this.
Well, I think the point you're making, Paul, is really relevant to leaders looking in, that what I've seen from building a high performance team, the high performance template, is that successful teams have a have a unique DNA, they have an esprit de corps, they have a sense of camaraderie, and that comes from having that bit of fun. But from a leader perspective, you need to set the purpose.
Shared purpose.
Like Martin Luther didn't say, I have a business plan, I have a strategy. What he said was, I have a dream. So Paul set the dream for his, and a vision for his golf team. And from that then he understood the concept of having fun. I've seen lots of images, Paul, before the Ryder Cup, of you having fun and having a couple of refreshments with the wives and with the players and bringing them together. And it's no different in any team, be it in the office or being in sport. And the challenge now business leaders have is that they're not in the office. They're not having that water cooler moment. And it is difficult to make connections with your team, but it has to be done, whether it's with your executive team and then that executive team make connections with their teams. But you have to relate to people. And like, none of us were employed to work remotely in the main. It's a very stressful environment. So leaders, again, need to be comfortable with the uncomfortable reality of having to reach out, probably from their kitchen or their living room, and reach out and ask, you know, how you doing? How's the family? And like, it's okay not to feel great as well. And if you're, reach out to people that can help you, because like the tide will turn eventually. But I think from a high performance perspective, keeping that solidarity and trying to have a bit of fun as well is really, really important.
Yeah, would you find that was the case with the Ryder Cup, dealing with expectations? Players
that's a tough place to be in. I mean, and that's where I hold you in such highest esteem, Jim. And I know you are very much part of that too, Lisa. Going for 5 in a row, the pressure and expectation that came with it is a difficult place for any sports person, no matter who they are, to be in. Only the really greats are able to get over that line. And these images that you're seeing on the screen now are representative of the challenges that we faced. And one of them is expectation. We had won 7 of the previous 9 Ryder Cups before I became captain, and we were playing at home, and we had the best player in the world at the time in Rory McIlroy on our team. We were expected to win. And that image on the left-hand side that you saw there of Justin Rose putting his hands out like that, that was representative of the story I just told earlier about holding 25,000 people in the power of your hands. That's what that was, and that's what the line underneath it was. And that's what I was communicating to the players at the meeting was, you've got ex-players are great at it. They're great at scaring you about how difficult a situation is. Oh my God, the first tee in the Ryder Cup, you can't tee up the ball, you're so nervous. All you want to do is make contact. No, I don't want to hear that talk. Stand up on that tee and look down the fairway and just think, look around you, see the 20,000 people around that tee and realize they're going to scream their lungs out if you nail it down the middle. Bit like a penalty taker. Just think about what it's going to be like when Croke Park goes crazy and you've hit the back of the net with a penalty. Okay. So these are other images. This is another image that, Jim mentioned there, the purpose. This is Seve Ballesteros. I took out a few bad words that were part of the original statement.
This is the edit.
This is the sanitized version. But this was his actual quote that was in our locker room. And this is about sense of purpose. And this is about, yes, we spoke earlier about fun. Of course, we want to have fun. We want to enjoy the challenge. But let's not ever forget the importance of being a competitor here and the importance of ruthlessness. That's really, in essence, what top-level sport comes down to. And then the other image we saw as well, which I showed earlier, was the one we call the Roll of Honour. And that was an idea that I got from listening to Alex Ferguson, who talked about chasing Liverpool all the time. So as much as we'd won 7 of the last Ryder Cups, that Roll of Honour represented how many times America had won back here. So actually, in recent times, we've won, but in the overall
Ferguson
picture,
there.
Yeah, they have won more than us. And he was Stuart Lancaster talked earlier about the importance of mentors, and he was a guy that I met. I think I met him twice in Manchester in the year beforehand. But I went to him with specific questions, not a question of, you're Alex Ferguson, can you tell me what to do in the Ryder Cup? I went with specific questions, and one of them was, for example, I was on 3 Ryder Cup teams, but I was always 6 to 12 in the team. I wasn't a superstar in the team. How do you manage superstars? What do you do with Ronaldo going into a big game? What do you do with Ryan Giggs? What do you say in the media? How do you position them? How do you take the pressure off them? How do you give them a platform to perform? So they're the kind of, corralled questions that I had for him, and I had all my notes written down. And then I got him to come and speak to the players on Tuesday night. But again, we talked earlier about continuity of message through visuals and words, and my vice captain, his words were all on message too. So everything he spoke about were challenges that I had planned that he was going to speak on the Tuesday night. So when I talked about it later in the week, he said, the players always say, that's connection back to, Alex Ferguson referenced that, and he gave a football example to it. So that's the continuity of the simplicity of taking what is a very difficult challenge, putting it down in terms of winning, putting it down into 4 or 5 different challenges, and then constantly hitting those challenges over and over with a strategy and a mindset.
And reinforcing a simple message. It's about marginal gains as well, isn't it, Lisa, when you're looking about the difference between success and failures? How do you identify those margins?
Yeah, well, I think and this probably is where the symmetries between sport and business are really quite close. That every time you hit a target, there's a new target, and generally targets don't come down; they generally go up. So, when you have a template where you look at the margins of performance at the top level, the margins are really, really small. So yes, you have to have that vision and that helicopter view. But then you also have to have that capacity to be able to zone in on areas and say, where are the margins? And I love this piece on marginal gains versus winning margins. So these times are from the London 2012 Olympics. And what you find is the difference between first place and second place, how small the margins actually are. So in the 10,000 metres, it's 0.48 seconds. In the relay, it was 0.33 seconds. In the canoe slalom, 0.36 seconds. And in the triathlon, 0.11 seconds. And over the course of 4 events, and you bear in mind, all the athletes, all the coaches, all the nutritionists, the psychologists, the families, all the moments in the 4 years that lead up to Olympic Games, that the cumulative total of the winning margins across 4 events was 1.28 seconds. So how can you go after those margins? How can you say, right, these are the things? And at Cork City, we had a situation where we lost the league by 7 points. And in that year, we missed 3 penalties. And over the course of those 3 penalties, the potential loss of points was 6 points. So for me, there was quite a significant margin within those penalties. And I talked to the players and the coaches about, how do you feel about penalties? And I got, penalties are a lottery. Penalties are 50-50. So the mindset was that penalties were a really small chance to actually sway this margin. So I looked it up, and actually, if you look at winning the lottery in Ireland, you've won in a 10,737,573 chance. And for me, you've a better chance of scoring a penalty than you have of winning the lottery. So for me,
50-50.
Absolutely. So for me, I wanted to see, what is the margin? Can we change the mindset? What is the margin of winning a penalty, of scoring a penalty? So when we looked at it, we found that penalties are not a lottery. Winning the lottery is a lottery. To win any lotto win, whether it's any number, it's 0.10%. So in football, we have a thing called XG, which is expected goals. So that is from a scenario close to the goal. What are the expectations of you to score from that position? And when you look at the penalty XG is 0.76, which is 76% chance of scoring a penalty. For me, that is a pretty good chance. Yeah. So I had to change the mindset of the people who would be taking the penalties, that these are in fact a really, really good opportunity to score. So we practiced them. And we practiced them week in, week out. And at Cork City, we won the league that year. I think we had 14 domestic penalties, scored all of our league penalties. And the cup final to win the first double in the club's history came down to a penalty shootout. And Stephen Beattie there took that penalty, and we actually changed his penalty because he took one, and I wasn't sure it was the best strike technique. And you can see this was Dundalk's fourth penalty, and Mark McNulty makes the save, which we predicted might be the pressure penalty, which might be the one that the player goes to, their most comfortable one. And then you see Kieran Sadlier putting away the fifth penalty. So scored the 5 out of 5. But what was really interesting for me was that the players had practiced that 150 times at least before. And in football, there's very few skills that you can actually practice as a singular entity because there's so many variables. But Carl Shepherd here, he took our first penalty, and Carl for me was a really interesting one because Carl was a striker, but his confidence was actually quite low when it came to penalties. He said that he never felt really confident about them. He would prefer if somebody else took one. So by practicing and changing the mindset and giving him the confidence that he could take that penalty and execute it and make the decision to, this is the penalty I'm taking. He went, and when we went in for the penalty shootout and I walked in, he went, I'm taking the first one, I'm going straight down the middle. And he said to me afterwards, I never felt more certain that I would score that penalty. And all it was a change in mindset, was a change in belief. He still went and executed the penalty. He made the decision, that's what I'm doing. And then all he had to do was be present, be in the moment, and walk down and execute the skill.
But key to that, Lisa, was identifying that penalties were a weak spot and it was time to improve on them, and that was the margin between winning and losing there. In a leadership,
I didn't see them as a weak spot. I saw them as an area for development, an area that was an area that we could get better in.
Yeah,
there was an opportunity for us in that particular area of our performance that we could go after.
Yeah,
with a change of mindset, with a change of belief, and with a change of application, and then go and can we get the execution right?
And build on those points and improve the game. From a leadership perspective, for those watching at home, how can they identify those margins, Paul, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk in sport at the moment, in the cycling world in particular. You know, you always hear about marginal gains, and certainly I was very much part of trying to get any edge I could. And, you know, as Lisa quite rightly explained as well too, you know, marginal gains are hugely important. But I'll just draw it back to a bigger picture scenario as well that's really important. And it was from the captain of the Ryder Cup team in in America in 2010 was a guy called Corey Pavin. And he quoted at one of his press conferences, I was listening to his press conference trying to gain something myself, and he quoted an American football coach. Somebody asked him the question, what advice have you got and who have you got it from? And I think it was Belichick or somebody he said, you know what, he gave me great advice. And this is a little bit bigger picture stuff on marginal gains. And he said, well, I got great advice, and the advice is always remember to make the big thing the big thing. Because sometimes we can get lost in looking for 1%, 2%, 3% here, and we forget what the big pictures are. For example, I mean, Lisa showed the example there of, say, a sprinter. So a sprinter, as much as maybe his diet is going to give him something, or something new in his diet, or something new in his sleeping or recovery, or something is going to give him 0.5% more or 1/4 of a second more. If he's not, you know, his glutes are really important, and if he's not doing the proper exercises on the glutes, the big thing are the glutes. If you don't have that in place first, the marginal gains are consequential.
Sometimes it's the most obvious things.
Absolutely, and it's easy to not see the woods for the trees. Sometimes we get so consumed in the modern day in technology and all this data that's available that we lose the bigger thing. Of course, both are important. That's what you need to get, but never forget the big thing as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Paul. Thanks, Lisa and Jim. That's the end of that session. We'll be moving on next to the High Performance Continuity Challenge. Jim and Lisa will be staying with us, and Stuart Lancaster will be rejoining. welcome back, and welcome back, Stuart, as we look at the High Performance Continuity Challenge. And in essence, that's to keep winning, isn't it really, Jim? But I want to ask you, because every leader has influences, but what has shaped you as a leader and as a manager?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Claire. You know, when I look back on my childhood and my upbringing, there's no question that my first introduction to leadership and the principles of good leadership came from home, from my mum and dad. Anne and Jimmy, they were married both from West Clare, and they were married in Ennis back in the early 60s and moved to a small little village on the outskirts of Dublin City in Clondalkin. And when I grew up, my dad was involved in haulage, and when I saw his work ethic, his grit, his determination, you know, when I got up out of bed in the morning, he was gone to work. I came home in the evening time. He still wasn't back, and when he did, there was sweat on his brow, oil and blood in his hands from a hard day's work. My mum was a primary school teacher, and she forged a career for herself in the 70s, which was probably not the done thing back then. And to see her influence and how she led her clan at home was very, very powerful. And they put me into two really great schools, Clonburris National School and Moyle Park College in Clondalkin. And both of those schools created a great environment for me and for sport as well, and I had such a wonderful experience there. But they were both under the flight path of a local airbase called Caseman Aerodrome. And I definitely recall in secondary school being picked up on a number of occasions from the teacher. I'd be looking at these aircraft making their final approach, and the teacher would catch me and say, "Gavin, you know, get your head back in the books." Little did he know that, you know, I wanted to be wearing that pilot's uniform. I wanted to be in the clouds, in that flight deck, flying that military aircraft. But my mum recognised it. And like any boy growing up, I wanted to play football, rugby, tennis. I wanted to swim. I wanted to do anything but study. But my mum understood the power of, I suppose, leadership persuasion, the power of setting a purpose and giving me a why. So one day when I was probably dragged in to put my head into the books, there was a little image of a pilot in uniform, and my mum was giving me that why, that purpose of why I should study for my leaving certificate, because she knew I had a dream to become a pilot.
And it was inspiring, but it wasn't done in a forceful way.
It wasn't, yeah. And she wasn't a psychologist. She wasn't a motivational theorist. She was just a good leader.
And she knew you.
And she knew she had obviously that connection as a parent, but just demonstrated really solid principles of leadership about setting the why for your team. She was shining a spotlight, I suppose, on my potential. So I applied, and I did the psychomotor and the cognitive tests and the psychological interviews and the fun interviews. And you know what? Probably didn't think I was going to get it. A boy from Clondalkin, there were quite lofty aspirations to become to get into the military as a pilot. So I did my leaving certificate and got a place in college to study engineering. And one day before I left for college, an envelope arrived in the post, had a harp of the government seal on it. Inside was a letter from the Department of Defence offering Jim Gavin a cadetship in the Defence Forces. And glad that I took it. And a couple of weeks later, I was being dropped off in a November morning, ironically, in a cold and damp, dark morning, in my dad's suit, and it probably looked like I was back in my confirmation days. And they said goodbye to their third son and handed me over to the military for 20 years. And I can only speak really highly of that experience, and obviously the tenets of leadership that I learned as a military cadet. You know, self-discipline. Obviously, they teach you how to use lethal force in very hostile situations, but also the physical courage. Yeah, they break you down to build you back up. The moral courage. But I also was introduced to leadership concepts of authenticity and integrity and honesty. And my first game to play with the military college was about 3 months after I joined, and there was 20 skinny, scrawny cadets in a dressing room, shaven head. Was really the full metal jacket experience, to be honest. And in walks this giant of a man into the dressing room, and he was Dermot Earley, those people who are looking in this afternoon will recognise that name. He was one of the most iconic Gaelic footballers and played for Roscommon for many, many years. A giant of a man. And he later became the Chief of Staff of the Irish Defence Forces. But when I saw his authentic leadership on reflection, looking back on it, and how he made a connection with his team, and he went around to the dressing room and shook our hands and just made us feel at ease.
He had a different approach to what you would have been used to in training.
He definitely had. And again, that authenticity that Dermot had as a man, as a leader, as Stuart would have said earlier on, some leaders just have this aura where you'll follow them from the trench out onto the battlefield. But there's words that he used that I've used in many dressing rooms with Dublin over the years. And what he said to us that particular day, and I repeated it even as far back as last September in the All-Ireland final, and words around this, that the greatest reward that you'll ever get in life is the satisfaction of doing something well and doing it to the best of your ability. So for me, in the football context, I have, 30 players. Some are really good defenders, some are really good forwards, and some are in between. And it's your job as a leader to shine a spotlight on their potential and to let it grow and to let them self-actualize, really. So I saw first that in the military, and that was from my mum. She was probably my first Maslow, my first Abraham Maslow, who talked about the hierarchy of needs, and she created an environment, as did my dad at home, where I could really be at my best.
How do you fast forward that then to 5 in a row, the epitome of high performance continuity in achieving all those wins with the Dublin team? What was it about what you learned back then about the power and the influence of someone like Dermot Earley that you could bring then into your management style with the Dublin team?
Yeah, I suppose, again, on reflection, looking back on what the players achieved, in the last decade, there's no doubt that the game is the most competitive that it had ever been in the history of the sport. This season, a lot of teams have a realistic chance of winning the championship. That's just the facts. And when we look at how intensely the games are now and how closely they're fought, every team is just looking for that little extra edge. And the technical, the physical, the tactical, the psychological preparation now is second to none. But what is often forgotten in sports teams and in businesses, and most managers and leaders in business forget this and miss it, is that the fact of it is that your culture drives your strategy, and it determines whether your strategy is successful. Your culture drives whether your team and your players will perform, and ultimately your culture will drive resilience, passion, your intensity, and ultimately the players and your team's self-efficacy to get over the obstacles that will be in their way. So for me, looking back on what the Dublin football achieved during my time with them, is that there is a culture around being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and just let me explain that for a moment. So, as I mentioned, I'm 23 years of age, and I got my pilot wings. I had my commission as an officer in the Defence Forces, but I also played on a Dublin football team that won an All-Ireland in 1995. We'd won a National Football League title, and I had 3 Leinster medals by the age of 23. But we go on to 1996, we were beaten. 97, we were beaten. 98, 99, 2000, 2001. 2002, my last season with the team, we won a provincial title, and it was celebrated like an All-Ireland title. But we go on to 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, before Dublin won their next All-Ireland title. And that's a 16-year spread between 95 and 2011. So when I took over in the year of October 2012, I suppose I had that experience of going through those losses.
Yourself.
Myself, indeed. So building resilience was a core part of the squad. And when I look at what my 7 years in charge of the team, over the 6 titles that the team won, 50% of the finals were won by 1 point, and 2 of those games went to a replay. So resilience had to be part of that DNA of that particular team. And what those players showed to me was the tenets of resilience. So players understood, and the team understood that suffering and hardship are just part of life. That is it. It's not that they accept it; they just understand that this happens in life. They also understood that where they could put their focus, and this has already been mentioned. You control the things you can control, and those you can't, you don't focus on them. So they focused on the things that they could control. And the last bit, which was very impressive with this particular group of players, was on the pitch, on that battlefield, and indeed off it as well. They understood between a stimulus and the response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to make a choice. And that choice gives you your freedom, and it gives you your growth. And one of the players which really best demonstrated this to me was a player called Darren Daly, who has 7 All-Ireland titles. So Darren would have played on my first competitive game as a manager on the 1st of June 2013 against Westmeath. And we're going to see a clip now of Darren, I suppose, on the battlefield, on the pitch. And this is the All-Ireland final, the first game in 2016. Here we have Dermot Connolly going for a score. We've got about one probably play left, one attacking moment left for Mayo. And we can see in the clock we're into added time. We're up by a point, and things are looking really good for Dublin at this stage. And we're going for a 2 in a row. Hadn't been achieved since the 1970s with Dublin. Mayo work a short kick out. And no better team, resilient team than Mayo. They've always shown it against us. And they develop an attacking play, attacking moment, and they get the ball to one of their best forwards, and he still is one of the best forwards in the country, Cillian O'Connor. Darren gets his position a little bit wrong. Footwork probably isn't what it should be for his standard. Gets caught, and Cillian takes a fantastic score to nail a point, to bring the game into a replay. We talked about resilience. The team accepted that just sometimes happens in games. Now we're into the replay 2 weeks later. Again, it's a very similar scenario. We're a point up. We're deep into additional time. Darren now has gone away. He's reflected on things that he can control, about getting his positioning right. He's now, after coming onto the pitch, and he's on it now for about 7 minutes. Again, he's one of the most impactful players we ever had. And ironically, the same scenario presents itself to Darren this time. Tom Parsons gets the ball, looks at the space inside. Cillian O'Connor again is inside, and Tom is trying to pass the ball into Cillian for a score. Darren Daly, same play as 2 weeks ago, executes a beautiful block on the ball. It's a turnover. We gain possession. Referee blows the final whistle, and the game is over. That's resilience.
Happiest man on the pitch, I'd say that day.
Absolutely, as we all were. So that's a culture where players are comfortable with being uncomfortable, looking on themselves. Stuart mentioned earlier on that self-reflection piece. And for me, developing that culture is all about living it as well. So from a leadership perspective, you can have all the values you want on a nice piece of paper and put them on your office wall, or put them on a statement strategy. You have to live them. And here's an image I have that I took, the very last image, because I'm reinforcing points to the team all the time about being respectful of the ground staff, showing, I suppose, honesty and integrity, but also the humility. So, a few minutes earlier, that dressing room was full of joy. This photograph was taken on the 14th of September 2019 at 22 minutes past 9. The team had won the 5 in a row, the first time in men's sport. And there was unbridled joy and tears as well as the players achieved their goal that particular year. But this is how the players left that dressing room on their initiative. So this really is an example for me of just living your culture. And in terms of high performance and continuity, you've got to live your culture. You've got to embrace your vulnerabilities, as Darren did. And generally speaking, players then will be their best.
Yeah, it's an incredible image when you think about the highs of that day, but the fact that there was the humility and the resilience among the players to leave the dressing room as they did. and it's quite incredible. Lisa, I'd like to bring you in here. There's a word, 3 words, key performance indicators, that many people tuning in today would be familiar with. What do you take from them in a world of sport? Where do you identify them? And how do you make them work to the best of your sporting ability?
I think key performance indicators are really interesting because they often become the metrics at which we measure performance. So if you say, I'll show an example here because key performance indicators can change, as we talked about earlier, that what does success look like? So if your evolution of a winning tempo, as things change, things will look. So if you look at this clip and you've seen a player, Sean Maguire, running down to cross a ball and it gets blocked to go out for a corner. So I asked the players, was that a successful cross? And some of them said no, because the ball didn't go into the box. And some of them said yes. So every key performance indicator and every time you define success, you have to have context around it. So if you look at a key performance indicator, if we had said that week in training that we're going to cross the ball to the back post, that would have been an unsuccessful cross. But in that particular season, we scored 42% of our goals from set pieces. So to get the cross blocked and for it to go out for a corner and then to have the opportunity
was
to
actually
deliver
a
a corner
success.
was successful. So when you are measuring your performance, I think it's really important as a leader that not only does your goal setting evolve, but also how you measure success. And that has to always evolve as well. And I always remember a school teacher I had, and the impact he made on me was, I remember in school, he would never ever give me an A. It was always a B. Always, always, always a B, no matter how good I was. And I remember I asked him one day, why won't you give me the A? And he said, because I think there's more in you. It's not that your performance isn't good. Your
Did that drive
performance
you?
is excellent. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Because we cannot achieve perfection. We can only improve.
Okay. I'll come back to you in a minute on that, Lisa. Stuart, I want to bring you in here. The issue, the idea around key performance indicators. Are you a fan of them?
I am to a point. I'd be very much on the art of coaching and the art of leadership rather than actually getting key performance indicators. And the thing I think is that key performance indicators should be behavioural. So I worked at the RFU, and I remember I was working for the under-18s and coaching the England 18s, England 20s, and the HR department had basically said, if you get England 18s to win 5 games in a row or win the Six Nations or whatever, you know, there'll be a key performance indicator and it'll help you with your sort of bonus or whatever else. And I was like, I've got zero interest, you know, in that. What I want to be judged on is, you know, not our England 18s being successful, because it was actually, you know, about developing individuals to play for the England senior team. What I was interested in was, are my behaviours as a leader effective? So am I being authentic? Am I being honest? Am I being inspiring? Am I being credible as a leader? Am I getting the best out of people? And all these things for me are what KPIs are about. They're behavioural rather than making them systematic, if you like. And certainly at Leinster, we talk, again, like as Jim has said, about a values-based culture on identity. They're very hard things to measure. We can measure, you know, how many tackles we make, how many tries we score, the ball in play time, but we can't measure effort, intensity, character, resilience, coming back when the chips are down, wanting the ball when the game's on the line. These are the things that matter to me as a leader.
Jim, I want to bring you in here, and it's an interesting issue, isn't it? How do you measure performance when you're talking about behaviour and you're talking about instilling a culture? There's a big challenge now, isn't there, for people working remotely to perform and for leaders to inspire them as they try and work from home. How do you think they can do that in this current environment?
Well, let me answer the first point you're making about behaviours, and I think it's a really crucial one from what the point Stuart has made about leaders creating that environment. I've been working in the civil aviation industry for the last 10 years. I regulate civil aviation system. I'm in a superb team in the Irish Aviation Authority. And if we look at behaviours of that industry, if we applied the accident rate from the 80s and put that on top of the air traffic levels pre-pandemic, we would have a hull loss every week. That's an aircraft going down with multiple casualties. But the particularly commercial air transport, which is the airline industry in the main, it has become one of the most safest forms of transport on the globe. That's air, sea and land. And the reason it has created an environment which drives behaviour. So I used to fly, my last aircraft I flew was the Airbus A320. And when you think about that aircraft, it's 80-ton takeoff on a max takeoff weight. A lot of fuel in the tanks. You know, you've got two engines that are producing internally 1,000 degrees Celsius from combustion.
You don't want to think about it too much.
Well, it is but you're right, it is a very hostile environment. When you're at altitude at 35,000 feet, if the aircraft decompression rises and you don't get your mask on, you're going to feel the effects of hypoxia. The outside air temperature is minus 56 degrees. It's very cold. But we take it as normal. You'll have your refreshment, read your paper or magazine, and you'll think before takeoff, this is just routine, it's safe. Well, the reason it's safe is because the culture has driven a behaviour where a pilot, an air traffic controller, an engineer, a cabin crew member, as part of the security staff, if they make a mistake that will compromise the safety or security of that flight, they have a duty bound to report it. And there's legislation, and there's a really good example of regulation driving a good behaviour within this industry. Because we accept as regulators that humans make mistakes. That's accepted. So there's psychological safety around that, which allows people report their mistakes. And in a football environment, it's the exact same with the Dublin team. It's okay for you to make a mistake, because we want people on that pitch to put their hands up rather than their hands out. Say, well, how can we make ourselves better? So when you look at an air accident investigation report in an incident or an accident, it doesn't apportion blame and liability. By law, you can't. All you can do is say what happened, why it happened, here are recommendations, and the industry will learn from it. So that's the really important point about driving behaviour as a leader within your high-performing team. In terms of the environment we find ourselves in now, as I said before, we were not recruited or employed to work remotely in the main. So there is a lot of stress out there for people. But the paradox for leaders to get the most from your team in a remote working environment is you have to hand control to them. Now that's a very uncomfortable space.
It can be difficult for some leaders to do that.
And I've been speaking a lot about being comfortable about being uncomfortable. Because when you look at self-determination theory, and Paul has mentioned intrinsic motivation quite a lot in terms of empowering, stretching people, giving them autonomy. What I learned as a young 18-year-old cadet on the Curragh Plains was when you're controlling a platoon of soldiers, you can't live each of their actions on the battlefield. You can't control their emotions. All they'll do is not rise to your level of expectations, but they'll actually fall to the level of preparation you've put into them. So you set your intent, not instructions, give them intent, this is what we need to do. Here's all the information I have. Here's how I'll support you. Be very clear with the lines of who has responsibility. It's time bound. And then over to you, because people remotely understand their context. They might want to bring the kids to school. They might want to work before they bring the kids to school or afterwards. So letting people have ownership of it, of not only the not only of the, I suppose, the question, but also of the solution, and handing authority to them is key. So I have a clip here from the All-Ireland final of last year, and in this game we are, well, here's a clip of Kevin McGinley scoring another great goal. And Kevin was, for those again who know Dublin football and GAA, he is a prolific goal scorer. But in the game we see here, and the clock is running down, we're into overtime. Dublin are a man down, and I won't get into the rights or wrongs of that player being sent off. It's not for now. But we're a man down and a point down. And the 5 in a row, this iconic 5 in a row is on the line. Here you have Kevin demonstrating a player who is empowered, who takes ownership of the problem, comes along and makes a fantastic clean tackle to turn the ball over. Now, Kevin isn't known for that and wouldn't be perceived in the wider public for his tackling. But this is a player who takes responsibility. That's the empowerment piece. Ball comes to Owen Merchant, laid off by Kieran Kilkenny. Diarmuid Connolly supports him with a run. Nice training field manoeuvre to Dean, and Dean will always score from there. The game is drawn. We go to a replay, and thankfully the guys produce a performance in the second half. So that's really an example of a culture of learning, of being empowered, and really from a lead perspective. And I've seen it with Stuart's team, I've seen it with Paul's team, I've seen it with the teams that Lisa's been involved with, and indeed Fiona, that there's an Eastern philosopher that I would have studied quite closely, Sun Tzu, and he said that leaders are really best served when people barely know they exist. Their work is done, their aims fulfilled, and they, the players or the people in your work environment, will say that they did it themselves. And that really is the key message I have for leaders looking in today, is have the faith and the trust in your staff. Because if your staff believe that you trust them, as in, like Darren, he's trustworthy, he's got integrity, he's competent, he repeats things, that he will deliver for you. So just have faith in your teams, empower them to be their best, and from my experience in the high performance continuity space, they will deliver.
Stuart, I take it you'll agree with that, in building the culture and the empowerment and what you were speaking about before, in building leaders in every individual on the pitch, that in turn that can come to pay dividends at those crucial times. Yeah,
and I think, having taken over a young team when I was a young head coach at Leeds, with no foundation whatsoever. The England team in 2012, a complete transition from a team that was half of the squad were over 30 and weren't going to make the next World Cup cycle, to come into Leinster, which was completely different, with a different set of values and cultures and behaviours. The one thing I've learned is, in order to create that sort of empowerment, there needs to be foundations in place. So, and I'm sure Dublin have this in spades, but I would have it in this order. I would have culture first. You get your culture right. You talk about your identity and who you stand for and who you represent in the people of Leinster, the province of Leinster, the people of Dublin, or whoever. Then you get behaviours and standards. Then you get ownership, and then you get ultimately what you want, which is player-driven success. And I don't think you can get to that bit without the building blocks in place first. But if you get the building blocks in place and you're on that cycle in an organisation, or building towards that, that is where the true long-term high performance continuity challenge comes from. Because ultimately then, the trick is then, once you've achieved success, and someone gave me this analogy, which I think is a really good one, is like the performance clock. So let's say your team's at the hands of a clock, and you're at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, you're getting towards the peak, you've just won, the All-Ireland final, or you've won the Pro 14 or whatever. How then do you make sure you stay at 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock, and not go 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and go back down to the bottom and have to start all over again? And the trick is to keep doing what you're doing, keep all those building blocks in place, but also make change before change is necessary. So sometimes it's dropping 1 or 2 players off the end, bringing 2 younger players in, maybe 1 or 2 changes in the coaching environment. But that's something that Manchester United as a football team did brilliantly. You know, make change before change is necessary. Don't get to success and sit and rest on your laurels thinking, oh, we'll do it again next year the same way, because everyone, you know, the margins are so small. Everyone's copying you, picking up on what you're doing, and ultimately, you know, you'll fail. So keep ahead.
Okay, Stuart, that's a good point on which to finish this discussion. We're going to leave our panel there for a few minutes. Welcome back, and a big welcome back to all our panellists who have joined us here for this final section. Now, if you remember a little earlier on, Lisa asked the question about that infamous dress and what colour was the dress. Well, we asked you at home, and here are the results of that. I'm a bit disappointed, I have to say, because 60% of people believe that dress to be white and gold, which is where Jim and Lisa stood in it, I think. 32% said blue and black, which I firmly believe is the correct answer. And others, what do we have there? 8% thought other. I'd love to know what colours they thought that dress was, but I take it you're not surprised by those findings, Lisa.
No, absolutely. And again, it just highlights that people within every environment will be influenced by their past experiences, their cultures, their values, the influences, and all the things that shape them into the person that they are. And I think it shows again that within a team, you're going to have people who will see blue and black and who will see white and gold. But the most important thing is that you can all respect that everyone can see it through a different lens, but at the same time you can generate alignment and collaboration, and that people can come together despite seeing things through different lenses and in a different way to all go together and see the same outcome. And I think that level of diversity within your team is really important, to understand as a leader that people see things differently to you, and also that you as a leader have the capacity to see things differently as well.
Here's a question to all of you. When and why did you decide to become a leader? I'll start with you, Paul.
My peers voted me, to be honest. Didn't put up my hand. I was asked, as I said earlier, by Colin Montgomery, who was the Ryder Cup captain in 2010. So he asked me in 2009 to be captain of what was then the Seve Trophy, Britain and Ireland against continental Europe, and I went in and against the head I won, and I really enjoyed it. That was the thing, standing up in front of your peers for the first time as a captain, putting all the strategy in place. That was quite a nearly place to be. Going to a golf tournament without my golf clubs was a very strange thing to do, and I really enjoyed it. And when I enjoyed it and had a bit of success, it kind of stepladder from there.
Yeah, you knew you wanted to do it. Fiona, were you the same?
Well, obviously coaches selected me as captain, and I suppose I probably didn't think an awful lot at the time. Being asked was a huge honour, and I think if someone has that faith and belief in you, accept it, and then you'll sort everything else out afterwards. And thankfully I've learned a lot along the way, and it's shaped me as a person, a lot of the experience that I had, and hopefully that I've made a difference in some people's lives as well.
Stuart?
I think it was at school, going back to the head teacher believed in me and gave me that position, and also the head of rugby at the time, a guy called Tony Rolt, both the head teacher and I think they were the two people who gave me the leadership responsibility that was ultimately the catalyst.
Okay, moving on. Jim?
Yeah, definitely at home. My mum and dad gave me a great sense of giving something back to the community and represent the community, but in primary and secondary school as well, being captains of football teams. But, you know, obviously from a military perspective, I've been in that leadership environment for 20 years, and as a young, 18, 19-year-old, being taught the concept of serving those that you lead, that has always stuck with me.
What inspired you, Lisa?
I think it was the leaders that I actually worked with, the trust, the faith, the belief that they gave and put in me and empowered me to realise a potential that I didn't necessarily know that I had. They saw potential in me and propelled me and challenged me to strive and become better. And, that is a really powerful thing, to have that capacity to enable people to achieve, to enable them to go and realise their potential, to go and chase the dream. And For me, it's the greatest privilege of leadership is to have that capacity to give that to other people, to people that you coached, that you lead, your family, everybody around you, that as a leader you have that potential to realise and help people go after a dream. And if you can give them everything they need to go and fly, then I think it's the greatest privilege that you as a leader can have.
Okay, that's great. Let's move on to the next question. As a leader, what techniques do you use to drive accountability within the teams that you've coached? Would anyone like to answer that? Paul, you're jumping in there.
Well, I don't know, I'm moving in the chair. Accountability is obviously a very important point. You know, personal pride is hugely important. And again, I'm talking about managing a very elite team here of high-performing individuals, very self-motivated. For me, because they were coming from individual sports and individual backgrounds, and even if they're not, I still think it's really important that you know, in some ways we're all very selfish as well. And it's important that as much as we're great team players, there's also an individual element to it as well. So motivating them as individual and why it's very important for them, the process and steps that they're making in their career, that they do a good job, and making them bought into who they are and where they want to be and where they want to aspire to. That's really important. That self-motivation is a huge part and element of anybody who's part of a team.
Okay, would anyone else like to come in there on that question?
I think if you have a values-based organisation, the way it works most effectively, as I've seen it, is you hold people accountable to the values. So it lends to the players would have come up with the values, 3 values, and then underpinning those values there are a series of behaviours. They're the players, they own them, and then we hold each other to account to those values. And I think it's a really effective way of getting high performance in a team if it's shared.
Okay, the next question, and I will say to people, we've had hundreds of questions and a lot of interest, and people have a lot to ask the panel here today. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of them, but we'll just get on to our next one here. Do the guests believe that the characteristics of a winning culture is unique to each team, or are there certain non-negotiables to creating a winning culture? Stuart, I think you had a specific interest in that one.
Well, I'll just say, you don't get high performance and tag culture on at the end. I think one of the characteristics of a high-performing team, or the most important, is you've got to get that culture and environment right first. Jim Collins would say in his book, get the right people on the bus and then drive it somewhere great. So it's all about the people, it's all about the environment, it's about a place where people feel valued and part of the organisation. There's a clear vision, and ultimately that's the leader's job to create that. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that you can create a high-performing organisation with a strong culture if you have effective leadership at the top. In the converse way, if it's not effective leadership, then I think you're struggling.
The winning formula, Jim?
Yeah, definitely in high-performing teams, the culture, the environment and the values that drives the behaviours of the team players. But in terms of leadership, and that's what we're on to talk about today, the common trend is that the leadership has a strong purpose, a strong vision, and keeps reinforcing this is where we're going. And they can take we spoke about the helicopter view. They can look at the longer term. This is where we need to get to. And as Napoleon, that great leader, said, that leaders will give people hope from their vision of where we need to go.
Okay, good answer. Next question, adversity, failures, they're unavoidable. Can the panel share some tips which they have used to get past these moments in time? Fiona, I'll ask you about that one.
Yeah, I think you can learn a lot from the failure, and it's about analysing it. And I think Stuart mentioned it earlier, it's not always looking in the past, it's learning from the past and then moving on to the future and what the next goal is and what next thing you're trying to achieve. But certainly don't sit in that past, because you could end up in a black hole.
Okay, Paul, would you, we were talking earlier about 90% losing, 10% winning. At the odds,
and that's a successful one, and most ever.
That's the guy who won a lot.
It's a tough sport, didn't I? Yeah.
You're taking it, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Stuart was very eloquent there when he talked earlier about his experience with England. Sitting down and being really honest with yourself. I love the idea as well. I certainly do it myself. I've only done it recently. I wish I did it longer in my career, of writing my own diary, my own journal. It doesn't have to be a big long essay, far from it. 2 or 3 lines every day of what you did and how much you practiced, what you trained, and all those kind of things. Because when you have that in place, and then if something goes wrong, you can look back and you can look at the data through that window and through that lens of information that you've gathered. Because we often forget things. We forget things a lot. So I like that, and the analysis of why did it go wrong. There's always a reason. There's always a reason.
But I think in the current environment with the pandemic, again, the characteristic of high resilient people is that they understand that that suffering and disappointment is part of life. It's not that they accept it, they just understand it. So where do you put your focus on? The things you can control. So it's really important that, and to finish off on this, is that there's a great Irish seanfhocal that says, Níl tilla dá bhéad nach drán, even the highest tide will turn. So this will turn. Don't be too optimistic, because we don't know when it will turn, but stay connected and focus on what you can control. That generally will get you through it.
That's a really uplifting note to finish this discussion on, and this meeting of great minds here today. So I'd like to thank all our panel. I'd like to thank you at home for tuning in, and we hope that you gained some interesting insights into the minds of 5 great leaders, and our media partners as well for supporting us in this. We've had plenty to discuss, and there's plenty of thoughts that I'm sure that milling around your head at home. And the good news is this Leaders Lounge series may be back. Keep an eye on the Leaders Lounge website, because we hope to bring some good news to you and return in January 2021. But for now, take care. Goodbye.